The return nobody thought was possible. Nobody in the NBA thought this door would ever open again. Not after the parade. Not after the heartbreak. Not after Kawhi Leonard lifted Toronto to the greatest moment in franchise history and then walked away before the city even finished celebrating. But 7 years later, the impossible has happened. Kawhi Leonard is going back to the Toronto Raptors. And this is not just another trade rumor floating through the offseason. This is the kind of move that shakes an entire conference, forces front offices to panic, and makes every fan ask the same question. Are the Raptors about to repeat history, or did they just gamble their future on a ghost from 2019? The reported deal is massive. Toronto sends Brandon Ingram, Gradey Dick, multiple future picks, and valuable draft capital to the Los Angeles Clippers in exchange for the one man who already delivered the Raptors their only championship, a 5-year-old superstar, a two-time Finals MVP, a player with a championship resume, a complicated injury history, and a legacy that somehow still feels unfinished in Canada. The reaction around the league was immediate. Some analysts called it brilliant. They looked at Kawhi next to Scottie Barnes and saw defense, toughness, playoff experience, and a real chance to scare the East again. They saw a Raptors team that had already started climbing, now adding a closer who has proven he can take over the biggest moments in June. But others looked at the price and froze. Because this is not 2019 anymore. Kawhi is not the same unstoppable force who hit that legendary Game 7 shot against Philadelphia. Toronto is not bringing him into a veteran locker room with Kyle Lowry, Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, and Pascal Siakam. This is a younger Raptors team, a different era, a different gamble, and that is what makes this story so dangerous. The Raptors are not just trading for a player, they are trading for a memory. They are betting that the same man who once gave them everything can somehow do it again, even after Los Angeles ended in disappointment, injuries, pressure, and unanswered questions. Kawhi left Toronto once to build his own legacy. Now, he may be coming back because Toronto is where that legacy truly lives. So the question is simple. Is this the return of the Claw or the beginning of the biggest mistake the Raptors have made in years? Before we go deeper, comment where you're watching from right now. If you believe Kawhi can make Toronto a title contender again, type 1. If you think the Raptors gave up too much for an aging superstar, type 2. And if you want more NBA drama, trades, and breaking stories like this, subscribe to the channel right now because this comeback story is only getting started. Why Toronto took the risk. Again, the craziest part about this entire move is not that Toronto wanted Kawhi Leonard back. It is that Toronto looked at the same kind of risk that once terrified the league and decided to run straight toward it again. Because this story has a familiar shape. In 2018, the Raptors were a good team, maybe even a very good team, but everyone knew the truth. They were respected in the regular season and doubted in the playoffs. They had talent, chemistry, leadership, and a loyal fan base, but they were trapped under the same ceiling. Every year, people asked if Toronto was real. Every year, the postseason answered with disappointment. So the Raptors made the move that changed everything. They traded DeMar DeRozan, a franchise icon, a beloved scorer, a player who gave his prime years to Toronto, for Kawhi Leonard, a superstar entering the final year of his contract. It looked ruthless. It looked cold. It looked dangerous. And for a moment, it looked like the kind of gamble that could destroy trust inside an entire organization. Then Kawhi delivered the only championship in Raptors history. Now, years later, Toronto is standing in almost the same place again. A competitive roster, a young star in Scottie Barnes, a defense with real teeth, a fan base hungry for another deep run. But still, one major question. Who is the closer when the game slows down? The crowd gets loud, and playoff defenses take away everything easy. That is why Kawhi became impossible to ignore. Brandon Ingram can score, Gradey Dick still has upside, future picks matter. But none of those pieces carry the same playoff fear as Kawhi Leonard with the ball in his hands and 4 seconds left on the clock. Toronto knows that better than anybody. They have lived it. They have seen the building shake. They have watched the ball bounce on the rim while an entire country held its breath. This is not just a basketball decision. It is emotional memory fighting future logic. The smart side of the brain says, do not trade too much for a 5-year-old star with an injury history. Do not sacrifice future picks. Do not rush the Scottie Barnes timeline. Do not get seduced by nostalgia. But the competitive side says something different. It says banners do not come from playing safe. It says championship windows are rare. It says if a player who already proved he can win in your city tells you he wants to come back, you listen. And if the East is open enough, if Barnes is ready enough, if Kawhi is healthy enough, maybe one bold move can change everything. That is what Toronto is betting on. Not just Kawhi's body, not just Kawhi's numbers, not just Kawhi's name. They are betting that some places bring out something different in certain players. And for Kawhi Leonard, Toronto may be the one place where his quiet dominance, his strange rhythm, and his playoff coldness make perfect sense. The first time Toronto took this risk, it made them champions. The second time could make them legends. Or it could become the gamble that cost them their future. The Clippers' quiet collapse. To understand why Kawhi Leonard is wearing Raptors red again, you have to look at what quietly fell apart in Los Angeles. Because from the outside, the Clippers were supposed to be everything Kawhi wanted. A homecoming, a superstar partner, a billionaire owner willing to spend, a new arena, a major market, a franchise desperate to escape the shadow of the Lakers. When Kawhi chose the Clippers, it was supposed to be the beginning of a new power structure in the NBA. Instead, it became one of the strangest almost stories of the modern era. The Clippers had moments. They had talent. They had names. They had expectations every single year. But the one thing they never had was the one thing Kawhi was brought there to deliver: a championship. That is the brutal truth. 6 seasons passed. Injuries came and went. Playoff hopes rose and collapsed. The team changed pieces, changed expectations, changed excuses, but the final result stayed the same. No parade, no finals appearance with Kawhi leading the chart. No moment where the entire league had to admit the Clippers' experiment worked, and then last season made the decision even colder. Kawhi was still producing at a star level. He was scoring, defending, and putting up the kind of numbers that usually force a front office to double down. But the Clippers were not winning enough. They finished around the middle of the pack, stumbled into the play-in picture, and watched their season end without the kind of fight that convinces an organization to keep aging around an expensive core. That is when the silence became louder than any statement. The Clippers did not need to publicly disrespect Kawhi. They did not need to leak that they wanted him gone. All they had to do was avoid making a long-term commitment. No firm extension, no clear future plan built around him. No declaration that his era in Los Angeles was still the priority. And players noticed that. Kawhi may not say much, but he understands business. He knows when a team is leaning in, and he knows when a team is preparing for life after. Once the Clippers started shifting toward younger pieces, once the front office began thinking about flexibility, the message became clear. Los Angeles was no longer chasing Kawhi's time. They were escaping it. That does not mean the Clippers were wrong. Sometimes a franchise has to admit the dream is over before the entire future burns with it. But the way it ended feels strange because it never exploded. It faded. It cooled. It became a quiet organizational calculation after years of massive expectations. And that may be what hurts most. Kawhi did not leave Los Angeles as a villain. The Clippers did not throw him out as a failure. But both sides reached the same uncomfortable truth. The partnership had gone as far as it could go. The Clippers gave up an enormous amount to build around him. Kawhi gave them elite production when available, but basketball history does not remember what almost worked. It remembers who lifted the trophy. And in Los Angeles, Kawhi never did. So Toronto did not just trade for a superstar. They traded for a man leaving behind an unfinished chapter, a bruised experiment, and a question he may never say out loud. What if the best version of my legacy was never in LA at all? The failed Los Angeles legacy. When Kawhi Leonard left Toronto in 2019, he wasn't running from success. He was chasing a different kind of legacy. He had already given the Raptors everything they had ever dreamed of: a championship, a parade, a shot that became history, and a postseason run that turned him into a legend in Canada. But instead of staying, Kawhi chose Los Angeles. He chose the Clippers. He chose the idea of building something that belonged entirely to him. At first, it sounded perfect. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. 2 elite wings. A hungry franchise. A billionaire owner. A chance to change basketball in Los Angeles. And finally pull the Clippers out of the Lakers' shadow. But the dream never became reality. There were flashes of greatness, but never the final result. Injuries kept interrupting the plan. Playoff runs kept falling short. The team kept changing around him, but the championship never came. The Clippers gave up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a massive pile of draft picks to build the Kawhi era. And years later, that decision looks painful because Shai became a superstar while the Clippers never reached the top. That is the brutal part of Kawhi's Los Angeles chapter. He went there to build a legacy, but the strongest legacy of his career still lived in Toronto. The Clippers era did not end with a dramatic explosion. It ended quietly, with disappointment, uncertainty, and a franchise ready to move younger. And that silence said everything. Now Kawhi is returning to the city where he was at his best, where his story felt complete, and where fans still remember him as the man who changed everything. Los Angeles gave him the dream he wanted. Toronto gave him the moment that will live forever. Why Kawhi chose Toronto only. The most shocking part of this story is not just that Kawhi Leonard is leaving the Clippers. It is that he reportedly only wanted Toronto. He did not turn this into a league-wide chase. He did not open the door for every contender. He did not wait for the biggest market, the warmest city, or the easiest path to another ring. If the Clippers were not going to commit to him long-term, Kawhi had one place in mind: the Raptors. That changes everything. Because this is not just a trade. This is a choice. Kawhi knows Toronto. He knows the organization. He knows Bobby Webster. He knows the city, the fans, the medical structure, and the pressure. More importantly, he knows Toronto once gave him the perfect environment to become the coldest playoff weapon in basketball. In Los Angeles, the fit never fully stabilized. In Toronto, everything once made sense. That familiarity matters to a player like Kawhi. He does not need noise. He does not need speeches. He does not need drama. He needs structure, trust, and a team that understands how he works. Toronto gave him that once. Now he believes they can give it to him again. There is also the legacy part. Kawhi left Toronto to build something new, but the Clippers chapter never became what he imagined. Now, the idea of coming back and possibly retiring as a Raptor gives this story a full circle feel. The player who left after winning everything may now return to finish what still feels unfinished. For Raptors fans, that is powerful, because Kawhi broke their hearts when he left, but he also gave them the greatest basketball memory they will ever have. And now, after 7 years, he is choosing them again. Not because he has no options, but because Toronto may be the one place where his legacy still feels alive. The ghost of 2019, every Kawhi Leonard story in Toronto eventually comes back to one moment: the bounce. Game 7 against Philadelphia. The ball hanging on the rim. The entire arena frozen. One bounce. Another bounce. Another. Then it dropped, and Toronto changed forever. That shot was not just a basket. It was the moment the Raptors stopped being a team people respected and became a team people feared. Kawhi did not just win a series. He gave the franchise belief. From there, the Raptors marched all the way to the championship. That is why this return feels so emotional. Kawhi was only in Toronto for one season, but that one season became the greatest chapter in franchise history. He was quiet, strange, distant at times, but when the lights got brightest, he delivered. Then he left, and even though Toronto celebrated the title, there was always one painful question left behind. What if he had stayed? What if that team ran it back? What if the Raptors had built a dynasty? What if Kawhi's body had been protected better in Toronto than it was in Los Angeles? What if the best version of his career was always supposed to remain in Canada? Those questions never disappeared. Now, 7 years later, they are back. But this is not the same Kawhi. He is older. He has more mileage. The roster is different. The league is different. The pressure is different. Yet the memory of 2019 still follows him everywhere in Toronto. Every jumper will remind fans of that playoff run. Every close game will bring back the ghost of that Game 7 shot. Every postseason moment will make people wonder if the Claw still has one more miracle left. Kawhi is not just returning to a team. He is returning to the memory of the greatest season Toronto ever lived. The locker room question. The biggest question about Kawhi Leonard's return is not talent. The talent is still there. The real question is culture. Kawhi is not a normal superstar. He does not lead with speeches. He does not talk constantly. He does not try to win the room with emotion. He leads by getting the ball, finding his spot, and delivering when the game gets tight. That style worked perfectly in Toronto in 2019. Kyle Lowry accepted his role. Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, Danny Green, Pascal Siakam, and Fred VanVleet all understood the mission. The team had veterans, discipline, and sacrifice. Everyone knew Kawhi was the closer, and everyone was willing to live with that because it led to winning. But in Los Angeles, the same style became more complicated. The Clippers had talent, but the chemistry never felt as strong. Injuries disrupted everything. Roles changed. Expectations grew heavier. Kawhi's quiet dominance did not create the same unity it once created in Toronto. Now the Raptors have to answer a difficult question. Can this new generation handle Kawhi's style? Scottie Barnes is not just another young player. He is the future of the franchise. He needs touches, confidence, and space to grow. Kawhi cannot return and turn Scottie into a passenger. But Scottie also has to understand that Kawhi was brought back for the biggest moments. That balance will decide the season. If Kawhi respects Scottie's growth and Scottie accepts Kawhi's playoff experience, Toronto could become dangerous fast. But if the roles become unclear, the same trade that raised the Raptors' ceiling could create tension inside the locker room. This is where the deal becomes bigger than basketball. It becomes about trust. In 2019, Toronto had a culture strong enough to absorb Kawhi's quiet power. Now they have to prove they can do it again. The Scottie Barnes factor? Scottie Barnes is the key to whether this trade works. Without him, Kawhi's return would feel like pure nostalgia. A legendary player coming back to the place where he made history. A great story, but not necessarily a real plan. Scottie makes it a plan. He is Toronto's future. His size, defense, passing, energy, and versatility give the Raptors a foundation. That is why Kawhi's return has to help Scottie, not slow him down. On paper, the fit is scary. Kawhi and Scottie could become one of the toughest wing duos in the NBA. Defensively, they can switch, pressure, and make life miserable for opposing stars. In the playoffs, that kind of wing defense is gold. Offensively, the balance could work too. Scottie can push the pace, create for others, and attack in transition. Kawhi can slow the game down, punish mismatches, and give Toronto a closer when the offense breaks down. That is the dream, but the timeline is tricky. Scottie is still growing. Kawhi is trying to win now. One represents the future. The other represents urgency. If Toronto gets the balance wrong, Scottie could lose rhythm in his own era. But if they get it right, Kawhi could teach him what real playoff basketball demands. That is what makes this pairing so important. Kawhi cannot just return as a symbol of 2019. He has to become the veteran star who helps Scottie reach another level. And Scottie has to prove he can share the stage with a legend without shrinking. Because Kawhi may bring back belief, but Scottie Barnes is still the reason Toronto's future matters. The price of ambition. Toronto paid a massive price for this dream. Brandon Ingram is gone. Gradey Dick is gone. Future picks are gone. Flexibility is gone. The Raptors gave up pieces that could have helped them build slowly around Scottie Barnes, but slow was not the plan anymore. This trade says Toronto wants to win now. That is the danger and the beauty of the move. If Kawhi stays healthy and plays like a star in the postseason, the Raptors could become one of the most dangerous teams in the East. They would have defense, size, experience, and a closer who has already proven he can win in Toronto. But if Kawhi's body breaks down, the cost could be painful. Age does not wait. Injury history does not disappear. A championship window can close fast. One setback could turn this from a bold move into a mistake that follows the franchise for years. That is why the future picks matter. Those picks were not just trade assets. They were insurance. They were options. They were Toronto's safety net. Now that safety net is smaller because the Raptors chose ambition over patience, and maybe that is the right call. In the NBA, being too careful can be its own trap. Teams can protect picks forever and still never become real contenders. Toronto already knows what it feels like to take a dangerous swing and win everything. So they swung again. This is not a safe plan. It is a championship plan. And championship plans are supposed to scare you. Now the pressure is simple. Kawhi has to stay available. Scottie has to rise. The locker room has to buy in. The front office has to keep building with fewer tools. If it works, Toronto will look fearless. If it fails, the price will echo for years. Can the Claw do it again? So now the entire story comes down to one question. Can Kawhi Leonard do it again? Not in the exact same way. That version of the story is gone. The 2019 Raptors are gone. Kyle Lowry is gone. Nick Nurse is gone. Masai Ujiri is gone. The locker room, the timeline, the expectations, the body, the league, everything has changed. But the challenge feels strangely familiar. Toronto has once again taken a massive swing. Once again, the Raptors have chosen risk over comfort. Once again, they have decided that being careful is not enough when a championship door might be open. And once again, that decision centers on Kawhi Leonard. Strategically, the move makes sense if three things happen. First, Kawhi must stay available when it matters. Toronto does not need him to chase regular season awards. They do not need him to play like it is 2019 every night in January. They need him managed, sharp, and ready for the playoff. If the Raptors can protect his body the way they once did, the entire trade becomes much easier to defend. Second, Scottie Barnes must become more dangerous, not less. Kawhi's presence should give Scottie clearer matchups, better spacing, and a real example of playoff shot making. But Scottie cannot disappear inside the nostalgia. He has to grow through this moment, not around it. If he rises, Toronto has both a present and a future. Third, the locker room has to choose sacrifice before frustration. Someone will lose touches, someone will close fewer games, someone will have to accept a smaller role than they expected. That is how championship teams work. The difference between winning and collapsing is whether players see sacrifice as punishment or purpose. That is the real lesson here. Talent starts the story, but trust finishes it. The Raptors already learned that once. In 2019, they were not the most glamorous team in the league. They were not built around noise. They were built around toughness, patience, defense, and a superstar who became unstoppable at the right time. That formula can still work, but only if everyone involved understands that the past cannot simply be copied. It has to be rebuilt. For Kawhi, this return is a chance to reshape the final chapter of his career. Los Angeles did not become the legacy project he imagined. Injuries, pressure, and disappointment turned that era into a complicated memory. Toronto offers something different, not perfection, but meaning. A place where he is already forgiven, already remembered, and still capable of becoming something more than a one-year legend. For the Raptors, this is a reminder that winning big often requires emotional courage. They could have protected every pick, kept every young player, and waited for the perfect move that might never come. Instead, they chose a familiar risk with an unfamiliar ending. And for fans, maybe the human lesson is this: sometimes second chances are not about pretending nothing happened. Kawhi left, Toronto hurt, the Clippers' dream failed, time passed, people changed, but in sports, as in life, unfinished stories sometimes find their way back to the place where they began. That does not mean everything will be perfect. It means there is a chance to do things with more wisdom, more patience, and more respect than before. If this works, Kawhi Leonard will not just be the man who gave Toronto its first championship. He may become the man who returned years later to help protect the future while honoring the past. If it fails, the Raptors will face hard questions about age, assets, timing, and the danger of falling in love with memory. But either way, they chose ambition. They chose belief. They chose the claw one more time. Now I want to hear from you. Did Toronto make the right move bringing Kawhi Leonard back? Comment 1 if you believe Kawhi can lead the Raptors back into title contention. Comment 2 if you think Toronto gave up too much for a superstar near the end of his prime. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share this video with another NBA fan, because if Kawhi really brings magic back to Toronto, this could become one of the wildest comeback stories in basketball history.